why prevent the unintentional? Why not preventing the intentional or preventing those governmental, attack, such like a 007, right? But in the end of the day, if you think about what is the odds, you will be attacked by 007. And the odds, on the other hand, you have an insider, could be your employee, or could be your contractor or system integrator, holding an infected USB stick and plug into your system and result in infection. Or the odds, the cyber criminals attack your IT systems just for profit. Which is more likely? Is that 007 or is that a ransomware group and unintentional attack? I believe it's the later. And I'm Terrence, I'm CEO at TX1 Networks. Our company develop and we develop cybersecurity tools for OT, and we work with industrial leaders all over the globe. And today I want to share some best practices this large enterprise used to preventing those unintentional or ransomware getting into OT. Okay, number one, cyber breaches are happening. For sure, you believe that, but I want to provide a different angle. So if you look at the left upper corner, you see a lot of very familiar names like Stuxnet, like Shamoon, like Black Energy. So if you still remember, I would call it good old times. Those names are like I don't know, fairy tale, if not ghost stories. And at that time, you believe they won't believe to us. It's just somewhere in the Middle East Asia, in the desert, and targeted by, again, 007, right? But things changed. After 2015, 16, 17, so cryptocurrency being invented, and the cyber criminals changed their business model, right? The way they monetize, from just stealing the data and sell to actively ransom. And because of the popular of the WannaCry worms, and they see how impactful that WannaCry worm could be, right? They realize manufacturer and the critical infrastructure could be the weak spot. So fast forward to year 2021, you see more and more attacks to critical infrastructure and the manufacturers. But if you look closely, I will ask you, how many of them, how many cyber breaches there, they got the real control systems being penetrated and being manipulated? Even the notorious Colonial Pipeline, right? The dark side, the group dark side, they didn't really touch the system, the control systems for the bump, right? For the real field devices. Instead, they just encrypt the up-level servers. But still, Colonial Pipeline had to shut down the whole operation. And 2022, we saw more incidents. And by this time, supply chain security has been a real issue. On the other hand, we also witness some cyber sabotage. Why? Because that's the time when the European war happened, right? So later we will talk about a couple cases. But again, except for those cyber sabotage where people could touch the control system, in some other cases, even the OT being compromised, but they just attack the Windows operating system. So you think about it. I'm not saying OT is not in danger. No, OT is in danger. But in reality, in the real world, it's not. Hackers had to study how Siemens system works, how Schneider system works, like 10 years ago. No, right? They don't have to. Because of the IT-OT convergence, there are a lot Windows operating system or Linux operating system already there in the OT, and they simply take those systems down and can interrupt the operation. So that reminds us, what are our priority? What is today's priority against OT cybersecurity? So in my view, it's a time for perfect storm for OT security. So number one, IT-OT convergence, right? The automation, digitalization, and digital transformation accelerate everything, including the Industry 4.0. And the pandemic is not helpful, right? Before, we could call the technician, maybe from Japan, from Germany, to give us support. But during pandemic, because of the quarantine policy, we have to open a door for them so that they can do remote access. But that door also works for cyber criminals, right? And even we don't do that, but we have to provide a mean or measure like access server or access firewall for our partners overseas to access the system. Then hackers focus so much on finding the vulnerability of those firewalls, those VPN servers to get in the system. Later, I have another case to talk about it. And I think the worst thing is, the situation. I mean, how good of our defense in OT, how good our defense in manufacturing and critical infrastructure already caught the attention of cyber criminals. And surely people are putting more and more efforts in cybersecurity in OT. So this is the number of advisories published by CISA. And you can see the vulnerabilities being discovered keep increasing, right? And they listed a lot of vulnerabilities associated with top OT OEM, including Siemens, Hitachi, Mitsubishi, Rockwell, you name it, many famous brands. And if you go to TX1's website, we have a 2022 annual report, and there are detailed analysis to these vulnerabilities. And it will show you 59% of those vulnerabilities can be used to interrupt, to disrupt your operation. So it sounds fatal, it sounds deadly, it sounds lethal. However, the reality is, the whole last year, 2022, I wonder if there is 1% or 2% of these vulnerabilities being used to conduct the real cyber breaches. Why? Because hackers doesn't need to. They didn't have to. They could use existing Windows vulnerabilities to take down the system without even touch your Siemens, without even touch your Schneider systems. And there are some more data for your information. So, 10 years ago, that's hackers, they rarely touch manufacturers. And why? Because at that time, their business model was stealing the data and resell the data at darknet or dark web. But as we mentioned, they changed the model, right, to actively ransom. So at this time, they want to pick the soft spot, and manufacturers, unfortunately, been targeted. So according to IBM's report, 2021, 27 of all the incidents being supported by IBM, being handled by IBM, were manufacturers. And 2022, that number went up to 30%. So manufacturers right now are the most attacked sector in the world. It's even more than financial sector, it's even more than retail and the government. Very, very risky. Even inside OT, as you can see from this picture, comparing to energy, oil and gas, and transportation, the probability that the manufacturer got hacked are like 3x, 3 times, comparing to critical infrastructure. And let's take a bit time to look into the the geopolitical tension and what it has to do with the cybersecurity. So here I want to talk about the Viper attack. So Viper malware was found around 18, 19 months ago. It's the malware used by Russia to attack the Ukraine. As the name, the Viper malware is not traditional ransomware to encrypt your system. Instead, it just wipe it out. It also wipe out the MBR, the master boot record, which means it wipe out the data and force the system to reboot, but the system couldn't reboot successfully. So it's a dead brick. And so, because they don't want to take your money, right? The reason they develop this malware is just to destroy. So there's no point to ask for key and ask for ransom, okay? And Viper, so two things. First thing, the Viper malware target only on Windows operating system. So if you still remember Ukraine, again, it's Ukraine being hit. If you still remember the Black Energy breach where Ukraine been hit and they shut down the power utility and substation, at that time, the hacker wiped out the control system, not just the Windows. But this time, they don't target on control system. Instead, they just wipe out the Windows. Why? I think because that's enough. That's sufficient. That's more quickly. And second thing, sorry about the small letter. Many malware, because there are variants, means this malware has been spreaded to other region. And many malware we put a GPO followed by the malware name. Why is GPO? Means people use the group policy from the AD server to distribute the malware. Why? Because in order to destroy the MBO, you need to have the privilege as administrator. So actually, the quicker way is you steal the credential, and you become the administrator, and you deploy the malware and execute it. Just like the typical ransomware. Again, so in our, we are helping customers worldwide, right? In our real cases, if all of your OT server, all of your OT Windows server been encrypted or been destroyed, that means there must be something in common, like you have AD server who can talk to whatever Windows in your OT, or they share the same credential. We never saw hacker, bother to crack into a system, then the second one and the third one by one. That's too slow, right? So if you do have an AD server in OT, then we strongly suggest you to monitor it and protect it. And next breach I want to share is the Volt Typhoon, aka Vanguard Panda. By the name Panda, you already know which country this group works for, right? And why this is special? So first thing, this group, they compromise a lot of Soho routers from the internet so that they can control the Soho router to make them as a part of their CNC infrastructure, which means they try to hide the origins, where they come from, okay? And second step, they, again, find the vulnerability of a FortiGate firewall. Why? Because they are arguably the best-selling firewall in the history, right? And then they hack into the FortiGate firewall, and they can, number one, get the administrator credential, and number two, through the firewall, they can get into the intranet, and they stay there. For how long? It took Microsoft and CrowdStrike 13 months, longer than 13 months, to really disclose this hacker group. Why is it so hard for them to find them? Because these guys, they used leaving off the land technique, LOL. Why that? It's not left out loudly. It means they use the native Windows application to do the lateral movement. And because the applications are native and to the Windows, so the EDR and XDR system there easily would just ignore the behavior of those programs. And so, which means with this kind of attack, current EDR and XDR also need to level up. And we also believe the same technique will be widely used by other hacking groups too. So that's what we are facing. And obstacles and the challenges. Before I get into our obstacle and challenges, I want to talk about the real attacking vectors and what are the most important from my point of view. I think the most popular attacking vector here today in OT are still traditional malware and traditional worms. You will be very surprised that every month, we still see configure being detected by our solution. Configure, if you know, it's a malware developed 15 years ago, 15, in 2008. And the configure, been spreaded mainly by the USB stick. And why? Again, your insider, including employee, contractor, or system integrator, they could use the USB stick to do the file transfer, because in OT, file transfer is daily thing, right? Daily routine they need to do. And in some factories, they kind of like forbidden the use of USB stick because they know it's risky, right? And some of my customers, they said their engineer would manage to remove the keyboard and the mouse and use the keyboard and the mouse interface for their USB stick. So it's careless operators. But still, that could disrupt your operation because it's warm and it can slow down the machine. It can congest the internal network. And ransomware, again, I want to highlight this is by far the largest concern you should have. Because although these ransomware cyber criminals, they may not target your OT control systems, but because you have many Windows systems in OT, and when they bring it down, maybe your operation also down, right? Think about all the HMI, all the engineer workstations, your SCADA, and your business logic servers, including MES, including database historian server, all down. Could you still have your operation running, right? Even the Siemens system untouched. And the last one is the cyber sabotage, where they really try to destroy something and cause the damage to human lives or to environment. And in this case, they really need to manipulate the control systems and ICS. So I'm not saying cyber sabotage is not important. No, it's super important. But just think about the odds, the probability, and where you are in terms of the cybersecurity maturity and what you need to do presently. I want to also share some other numbers in our study, also in our 2022 annual report. So 47 of the guys we interviewed, they said it happened to them when they buy a machine from the supplier, or when the visitor from outside, like a system integrator or as a technician, those devices they brought in, including USB stick, the media storage, and the PC, or even the machine itself, could have the Trojan and virus inside and result in the propagation. And only 6% of the organization said their Windows operating, the systems in OT equipped with Windows operating system being protected well, which means 94% organization not there yet. And the last number, I hope you could, if you leave this room, this is a number you should remember. 94% of the time, when your IT got impacted, your OT will also be impacted. There is a firewall. Remember, we only interview with a large enterprise. So there is always a firewall sitting between IT and OT. But that firewall could be easily evaded by the hacker. Why? Because the hackers has been in the organization for 3 months, and they got all the important credentials they need. So the firewall itself is not enough. And we need to think about, if you have 1,000 machines in IT being encrypted, and if you have 1,000 equipment in OT being encrypted, which one is even worse? And the supply chain security is a real thing, right? And sometimes it's just your supplier being hacked, and the hacker used their credential and try to contact you, right, with email. And more often, your supplier being compromised, or as an insider, they share your information with the real hackers so that they can compromise your organization more easily. Or you buy a product, a machine from your supplier, and there is already a Trojan or malware inside. That's happened very frequently. And because your supplier are close to you, right? So they know your environment. So it's more likely that they are able to leverage the vulnerability of your IIoT, such like a camera, and through the camera to get into your core network. And what do we do? This is a report from Gartner. And surely they interview many, many large enterprises. And this report showed only 10% of the organizations have get into the integration stage of OT cybersecurity. Another 30% are thinking about it, planning, and the 60% are far behind, which means we are not ready to, fight with those bad guys. So we have continuous cybersecurity threats. The geopolitical tension, not helpful, and because of that, we have to face more and more high technique, and we are having a lot of collateral damage to OT. That's the external threats. Internally, I think there are two largest challenges. One is you don't have even the basic protection in OT. You think about in your IT, how many datatypes you have? How many of them are not equipped with any protection? But how about your OT devices and OT systems? Second one, the shortage of cyber talents, right? We couldn't even have the full capacity in IT. How could we have the right size of people we need in OT? So these two are the biggest internal challenge, I believe. And best practices. So we are not a consulting company, so don't expect this to be too organized. But these are the journey many of our customers, my customers, are going through. So I want to share with you. Number one, with the support from top management. If you don't have support from top management, I don't really see the bright side of your OT security, right? It's nobody's problem. And number two, so you need to define R&R. What does the IT team do, the cybersecurity do, the plant manager, asset owner, which one need to take care of which responsibility? And build not a big team, but a small team, right? Because you need to understand the limitation of the OT systems. I mean, if it's IT team in charge or security team in charge, you need to understand what are the limitations of the OT systems. So you have a small team, 3 to 5 people. That's the good size. And then you can extend. I suppose as a large enterprise, large organization, you should already have a very good cybersecurity guideline for IT. But now you want to extend the security guideline to OT. So that you could, three things. Number one, strengthen the perimeter security. You see OT as an entity. So you want to check whatever things get into the entity, right? Zero trust. And second thing, you want that OT entity become more defendable. And number three, if you believe you are doing good, how about your supplier? You want the whole ecosystem to be more healthier. So let me go through one by one. So again, with the zero trust touch, you want to carefully inspect whatever traffic or file or access into your OT network. So first thing, I suggest you don't just implement a segmentation as a firewall, but a segmentation of a DMZ zone. Right, at the IT DMZ zone, people are not able to access your IT server directly, right? Instead, they just access whatever data you put onto the DMZ zone. And in OT, I believe you need a zone, not just a wall. Because the wall could be easily evaded when the hacker has the credential and, and again, staying there for like 3 months. Second thing, remote access is always a big thing, right? You open a hole for your engineer or for your SIer. That hole could be used by hacker too. So why not just use those cloud services so that you upload the data, upload the connection to cloud, and your technician also go to the cloud to access that control or that data, so that they are not able to directly go into your organization. Many companies, not us, but many companies are now providing these services. And inspection of inbound devices, no matter it's just visitors, they could have the media storage or laptop, or it's your supplier. When they give you the product, when they bring in the devices, how do you know that devices are legitimate? So always inspect. Last thing, maybe you want to check out the outbound traffic. One of my clients, they do very, very extreme way. They don't even allow port 80 going out in their OT. So their philosophy is, even the hacker are able to break into the OT, they are not going to establish the CNC connection either. And second thing, you want a more defendable OT. But sure, beforehand, you want to understand what you have, right? You want to use the visibility tool to let you know what kind of devices you have, what are the network infrastructure looks like. You definitely want to identify what are the crown jewels so that you can protect them more effectively. Those are something you have to do before you can really become defendable. However, if you just use visibility tool and they do like a health check and they tell you you are not good at this and that, you have risk at this server and that, but day by day, you don't protect them. What is the point, right? And so you have endpoint protection and network protection. So most of our customers, they try to divide their systems into 2 groups. One is modern, like Windows 10 and 11 and new. Another is legacy, because legacy is more risky and they are not able to patch. So most of the time, they may install anti-malware on the modern and install the whitelisting, lockdown approach on the legacy, because they don't want to change it. But because if you are IT guy, you need to communicate with the OT guy. Then these are the ugly part. How about the impact to the system performance? How about the life cycle gap? Your antivirus life cycle could be 6 years, maybe, but your asset life cycle is 25 years, right? So what to do? You want next rollout or something. That part you need to talk carefully with your vendor. Same, in network, segmentation is very, very useful, right? You don't want the virus come in and propagate everywhere. You want, when you got the virus come in, that virus will be contained by the segmentation. And since you do the segmentation, why not performing virtual patch together with the segmentation. Because in the end of the day, you are not able to patch your system that frequently. Again, there are some ugly parts like network performance, like hardware software failure. Would that also interrupt your operation? You need to, again, talk to your vendor how to address this. And if you get there, you want to think about the detection and response, like IT, right? From like 2010, it's not just protection, right? We go beyond protection to detection and response. But again, I want you to think about the scenario. We at OT, we are not internet facing. If we saw a ransomware, that means there is a group sneaking into the enterprise for months, and they got the credential, and they already figure out a path, go into OT. So if you deploy the same thing, the same EDR, the same XDR in OT, I don't see that really helps. Why? Because if that EDR and XDR will miss the hacker for 3 months in IT, why on earth they are able to work in OT, right? So maybe you need a different approach, more like a OT behavior modeling approach. I think the whole industry is not there yet. There are some pioneers like my company, but that's the direction we are towards to. And if you think you are in good shape, then you want to promote or elevate the whole ecosystem. And I want to share my experience a bit that I work with TSMC, the semiconductor giant, to do some standard for the whole semiconductor industry. So number one, we develop a standard to regulate that when the supplier delivers the product, the supplier has to make sure that product is correctly configured without any unnecessary service, unnecessary applications, which means unnecessarily attacking surface. Number two, there's no Trojan and no malware in the product. And number three, the operating system need to be, again, maintainable or serviceable. And then TSMC also do two things, externally and internally. They work with some companies like a security scorecard to scan whatever their supplier to see how the score is. And number two, they send the questionnaire to their supplier to understand the security posture of the supplier. And then they can work with their supplier to persuade them to improve. And they done that by developing the industry standards, and we are happy to be part of it. And if you are a supplier, surely we already have some session talking about security by design, including SDLC, software component, and you can even hire the pen test experts to give it a try. But nowadays, I really see a trend where the supplier try to equip with the security product so that their product look more secure, including the software approach and the hardware approach. So I want to show you a collaboration between TX1 and Schneider, where Schneider put a TX1 IPS in front of their control systems so that when the SCADA need to configure the control systems, they need our IPS to open the door, a temporary door, and afterwards the door will be closed. So again, it's like a zero trust behavior, right? So as a supplier, there are still some things you could do. So conclusion, I think you should, when on your journey to digital transformation, put IT and IoT and OT into your blueprint is very important. And the threats are real. Even they are not targeting your ICS control systems, but the collateral damage could still bring the operation down. And so we suggest you to carefully inspect whatever network traffic, whatever file, whatever devices get into your OT, and make your OT more defendable by equipped with those cybersecurity solutions or measures. And if you are doing well, help the whole ecosystem, from within to without. And I hope you find this information helpful. That concludes my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. Let us now invite our moderator for the session, Mr. Eddie To, Partner, Cybersecurity and Forensic Technology Services at KPMG. Mr. To, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, I was told there was AI doing the introduction, but I still like to formally greet everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Eddie, Cybersecurity Partner with KPMG in Singapore. Now, before I invite our esteemed panel speakers, OTCEP members on stage, I'd like you guys to help me. I know this is a very challenging session, especially after lunch, right? I'll ask you to, take out your phone. Could you bring up the Slido barcode, right? Because I didn't prepare too many questions for the panel. I need your involvement in asking, right, the panels, what do you want to hear? I'm your voice, right? So I'll try to channel your questions with the most votes to the panel speakers in a while. Thank you very much. So thank you, Dr. Liu, for sharing. Really insightful. And, I'll please welcome on stage again as our, first speaker, panel speaker. And can I welcome Mr. Zachary Tudor, as well as Eric Baez on stage as well. Thank you. Okay, not too bad. We have a few questions already. Thank you for your cooperation. Now, first thing, right? This topic is quite interesting because we talk about unintentional. I think that is really a big word. Whether is it due to human errors or is it due to technology weaknesses or even processes, I think there's a lot for us to think about. Now, operation technology has been providing essential services to us, right, for decades or I would say century. Right, but of course, you have heard from various panels and sessions talking about the increase in attack in terms of cybersecurity, and I think this is quite important for us to really rethink about how we can prevent all this from happening. Now, case in point, I was reading through, and in 2020 there was an attempted attack on the Israeli water treatment plants by some threat actors. But that was stopped, and it wasn't successful, which is a good thing. However, in 2021, right, there was an attack on the Osmer and the water treatment plant in Florida, and the attacker tried to increase the lye content from 100 to 11,100, ppm. And the result of this, could be quite disastrous because just by getting in contact with this polluted water, it could damage the skin. And most recently, I think in this year, sometime in April, there was again an attack, on this hospital, Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, which is a non-profit organization providing a system for the North Florida and the United States patients, and to maintain health records and etc. But the system was brought down, and it took about 2 weeks to restore. It was not reported, what was the impact, and any lives has been impacted. But I think those are really, really real cases that we are reading from the news, right? Now, coming back to the panel, I think the first questions that I really want to know, and perhaps the audience as well, based on your experience and whether you're directly or indirectly involved in certain of the cases, are you able to share, right, with the audience, what kind of incident you have perhaps went through with providing assistance to or guidance to some of the clients that you have, and what kind of impact it has brought to them?
can start. And can you guys hear me? Yeah, you have to talk a little bit before it starts picking up. Okay, there we go. And so, being at a national lab, it's not so much clients, but we help governments, particularly the U.S. government, with response. So, as far back, well, let's just say as near as 2015, 2016, we helped respond to the attacks in Ukraine. We go with the State Department to other international types of events. We work with law enforcement, National Guard, others inside the U.S. For kind of critical infrastructure responses. So, that's some of the things that we work on. And it's kind of interesting when we look at as you mentioned, the unintentional or collateral effects. I think once again, Colonial is a very good example of that, right? So there was an intentional attack on, for ransomware, but the collateral effect was something that I don't think that the attackers, meant, and we know that Colonial hadn't anticipated. And so I think that's one of the first things we have to think about is, and I remember some of the questions that we have here, but then don't want to get too far ahead. But as you're starting to look at, once again, your risk management posture, you have to start thinking out of the box. You have to start thinking like an adversary. I think for too long, we have felt that no one will attack a hospital, no one will attack water treatment plants, but we've seen the critical infrastructure is no longer off the table. And so we have to change some of those things. And once again, also as a national lab, I don't necessarily talk about the infrastructures that we go and support. But I think that some of the things that you find in common are, you mentioned earlier, Terrence, in your talk, some of those exploiting third-party access, poor architecture, and poor practice. And I think we need to get over a lot of those things.
Zach just mentioned Colonial, and I think that's a really good example of what I call truly collateral damage, because as far as I can determine, the control system was never directly impacted. It was shut down deliberately. And a number of the events that I worked on over the last 2 decades have often not even had an attacker involved. They're almost, how would I say it, a self-inflicted denial of service. And it's often because people haven't laid out what would be the impact if we sever that connection, or if we do this in IT, what's the impact on the control system. I remember the incident that happened at the Hatch nuclear site in 2007. It's a long time ago. But, what that was is rebooting a data collection server up in IT that was synchronized with a cooling water monitoring system down in the OT department, actually took out the control system. So what I've seen is we've more and more integrated. There's no question that we've more and more integrated IT and OT. But one of the big things we really haven't thought about as much is what happens when that integration breaks. What happens when that integration is no longer there? Because we can't go back to the day where IT was over here and there's a complete air gap and on OT and IT or not. That's gone. But now really the question is, for every one of those connections, what's its impact? Not just, could a bad guy take advantage of that, but also, what happens if it goes away? And I think that kind of threat modeling is something we need to exercise a lot more. What happens when that connection that you put in goes away, gets abused, gets turned into, gets overused? What's your impact? I'll give you one more example. This is also about 10 years ago. We were working on a control system, very well-known control system. And part of that control system had a log management system attached to it. And that log management system was communicating, two-way communications outside the control system. And by pure accident, we decided to go and try and DOS the log management system, and it took the controller out. It just completely overloaded that poor controller and shut down. Now, that was all on a test in a lab. It was very nice. But the point was is that nobody had thought about all the potential risks that you have with a connection. Not to say the connection shouldn't be there, but we need to think those through. How do we, and exercise them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have here keywords like, connections and root cause like people or risk management. I think there are many factors that would result in, unintentional or, cyber attack from happening. Now, I'd like to bring up the first questions, which has 6 votes, right? And I think this is quite relevant, as per what we have been discussing. How can system owners determine the effectiveness of the defense, right? Is there an efficient and sustainable way to test them? Now, Terence, you mentioned about, what are the ways and practical aspects of things that, we can put in place in your presentations. Would you like to take that question?
Yeah. Well, in many of our customer base, what they are doing now is to extend their security guideline from IT to OT again. So what doesn't exist in their IT security guideline, I think it won't there in their OT security guideline in a short time frame. I think the gap is the manipulation of the control system, but again, for them, it's not in the top priority. Not saying they are important, but they need to do something basic. That they need to have basic protection. And so I think the cybersecurity principle for IT and for OT is not that different. I mean, again, how to measure the effectiveness depends on what you are trying to against with. Are you trying to against with the known malware, the known network attack? And if they are the case, I think you have a way to measure them. Or are you want to fight with the unknown, right? But in IT's cybersecurity history, all of us have been working hard to against the cyber threats to like 2010, and suddenly, the whole world admit that prevention is imperfect. You would definitely. If somebody like 007 have unlimited budget, unlimited time, eventually they are going to break through. And so we use a lot of cybersecurity product and solutions to eliminate those known threats so that our limited capacity of human talents, we can focus on unknown, right? And so I think that's exactly the same procedure we need to follow in OT. We need to increase and improve our cyber hygiene in OT so that the system can automatically block those known, those unintentional breach. And then our OT cybersecurity people, very few, but they can focus on unknown. And we should have different measures to effectively, against our security approach. I mean, again, what you are trying to do today.
So I think the question is what can we do to measure our effectiveness of our protections? That was the question. So I think there's a lot of techniques such as pen testing, modeling, things like that. But I'm going to take the question in a slightly different direction. And that is, hey, protection is just one. I said this yesterday. Protection is one of 5 pillars. And we tend to forget about detect, respond, and recover a lot. And so I had an interesting thing happen in our company. We're only 28 people, so we're not a big company. But I had a very interesting thing happen about 2 weeks ago. We detected malware in one of our core developers' laptops that had direct connection into our AWS SaaS deployments. What was interesting was trying to do the response. That was a real education in how, for the whole team, was an education on how to not respond. And so, as it turned out, it was a false positive. Killed the whole day, shut down our production, just made a mess of things. But the cool thing out of it was a really good simulation for the day when we really get malware. And so I think something that we really need to do a lot is not just check the the effectiveness of our protection, but the effectiveness of our response when our protection breaks. And let me tell you, in our little company, there's going to be a different response the next time we think we've got malware in a core server. But I think that's true for all of us. We will get infected. We will have problems. You know, the reality is the bad guys are real smart and we can't predict everything. So I'm a big fan of also not just measuring how effective our protection is, but how effective our response is. And that's done by role-playing, by doing simulations.
Yeah, and you didn't leave much space for me there because I agree with everything you said. And
Sorry,
also, I guess,
sorry.
So I'm on a pen testing panel, next. So that's one thing. And so I think a lot of times pen tests conjure up some, once again, cyber ninjas trying to, find an esoteric way into your network and then move laterally. But I think a lot of times, a pen test should be an exercise of those different pillars that you are talking about, or maybe an individual pillar at a time, because sometimes you can't do an end-to-end type of test. But I totally agree. So once again, so many ransomware attacks, so many of them are successful because we're not effectively making backups, and we're not effectively exercising our ability to restore from backup. And part of the issue with that is, and I think they talk about some of these different things, what's the worst thing that's happened, is when you try to do an exercise where you restore from backup and you bring your environment down because you didn't really know how to do it, and instead of a 2-hour exercise becomes a 2-day exercise. But once again, it's better than having a 2-day exercise where you still have to decide whether or not to pay someone $1 million to give you back your environment.
And I have one, if I may. So maybe the audience they want to hear about like blue team, red team, purple team, those kind of things, or automation test tool like Varadin and etc. But I want to share a KPI stuff that a Fortune 10 CISO shared with me, and he said, Terrence, we're doing layered defense, layer by layer. And in the newspaper, we always said, we block hundreds of thousands of attacks every month as an entity, as a government, or as a large enterprise. But they said those numbers are just, it doesn't matter. So in your layered defense, are you seeing the event or log keep decreasing in each layer? It should be decreased, right? But in what ratio? And in the end of the day, the layer defense there is for a reason. Why you need so many layers? Because none of them are unbreakable, right? So each of them could be break. But how did you catch the guys through that previous door and in next door, and so that you can measure the effectiveness of your defense? That's just another way I can think of.
Yeah, thanks for talking about that. I think by putting in more layers of defense technology or processes, not necessary, right, will be able to detect insider threat, for example. I think as an insider, when you are in the environment, once you understand how it works, there could be some way to bypass certain processes of technology. Thanks for answering that questions. Now, I think we have questions with regards to secure remote access, right? So the question is, what are the measures that we could put in place to secure remote access, or by vendor engineers, right, who have remote in to troubleshoot equipments? I think this is more to do with third-party business vendors assessing OT environment, and and there's also related questions. Have there been an improvement on the field as to how remote access risk is mitigated? Yeah. Anyone want to take that questions?
I'll take that one, although you already mentioned it. Cloud rendezvous type technologies where your control system calls out to a server, and the remote access person calls out to the same server, and they rendezvous in the cloud, is probably the best way to secure remote access, because it really requires the active participation of your control system. It's not just any time the remote person wants to get in. It absolutely forces that two-way collaboration. And then, of course, layer over top of the obvious things, it's full TLS encryption both ways, proper certificates, proper two-factor authentication, all the obvious stuff. If you don't have multi-factor authentication on your remote access, well, please just leave this room right now and go get it. So there's lots and lots I think we can do to make remote access pretty robust, that it isn't your biggest weakness. But the other thing that I'll point out is that I was on a project about a year ago with a very, very large oil company. And what they're seeing is there's now so many holes coming in, so many sort of entry points from all the move towards cloud-based processing, et cetera, that I think we're going to end up modifying that paradigm over the next few years. But for right now, the quick answer is use a cloud rendezvous type system. There's lots of them out there. And then put in all the security capabilities. I'll hand it over to you.
Yep, and so once again, I think cloud rendezvous is definitely a thing, but also you should, on a regular basis, maybe annually, maybe less frequently or more, is kind of audit all of your external partners and connections as well. Don't leave the capability for a remote partner who you haven't had business with in a year. It's just like the same thing, when an employee moves on to a new job, you don't keep his account active. So there are a lot of things that some of those audits find. Say, hey, what's this potential connection here? Oh yeah, I remember them. So a lot of those things, a lot of vectors that go and just kind of cloud the environment. One of the early folks used to say that when you can reduce the noise in your system, it is much easier to hear when something anomalous happens. So all of those potential connections, and once again, make sure that you really do need to have an external connection on something. Why have a potential remote connection for a service technician who always visits the plant? Yeah. We have it just in case. Okay, well, just in case, we'll come up with another environment, but let's not put that exception in place. And as you say, all those exceptions are threat vectors.
Yeah. Oh, and that actually just reminded me of another thought. Back when I was actually actively involved in designing firewalls, and one of the things that we saw a really good use case for firewalls, particularly a firewall like you guys produce, that'll do deep packet inspection, is, okay, you've let somebody have remote access, but don't let them have the full keys to the kingdom. Don't let them run up and down the entire control system. Give them read-only access to a specific controller, to a specific server. 10 years ago, that was hard technology to come by, but a technology like yours, that's a piece of cake to say, okay, yeah, you can go look at the PLCs, you can look at this PLC, and you can only send read commands. You can't actually change the process. And lock it down, make it, it becomes non-negotiable. I can think of a company, you guys probably know Solar Turbines, who make the big offshore gas compressor systems for pumping gas off platforms onto the beach. They've got lots of remote technicians. Every one of those technicians are blocked by a permanent firewall from actually being able to do any remote control. They can do remote viewing only. So that's a really good, that's another thing. And again, a tool like yours, that's an easy thing to fix or to use.
And we TX1 we deploy around 220 honeypots all around the globe. And although those honeypots, I would say 97% of the traffic is not OT related. It just try to break the routers or home gadgets. But there are some like a Modbus query, like a Profinet query that happens. Although we are not in that stage to really figure out what are their end goal. But like you said, if there is no multi-factor authentication for remote access, that's crazy now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I think one of the important points, through my experience as well, I think it's also important to know who is behind the keyboards, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, for those that have been given secure remote access, but we got to make sure that we know who are the engineers that is going to be logged on, and we need to restrict the access as well. So I have one question. I mean, it's the first time, the CSA has organized showcase booth, right? And I think it has attracted quite a bit of, positive notes from the participants or audience. Now, these are technologies that are available to help, the communities to rethink about their strategy. In terms of brownfield and greenfield plant sites, right? What are the practical steps you think, right? One should consider in considering implementing technologies or processes, onto this environment.
I can do a brief one. So in our case, it's like an organization, whether it's a manufacturer or it's a critical infrastructure. They said, I want to implement cybersecurity for OT. And in this case, they definitely have greenfield, those factories, those plants to be built, and brownfield, those are running today. And always they go for the greenfield first, because that's the easier one. They can save the cost of the wiring, application installing, and etc. But even the greenfield first, there are still some legacy devices inside the greenfield. So they still need to categorize the devices into the new, brand new, and legacy and unsupported. So that doesn't make too much change, as even for the greenfield, you still need the technology to cover those legacy devices. And you, Eric?
I'm going to check it over to you first.
Well, so one of the things that I think we all need to know, and I say this before, if an adversary is doing reconnaissance against your environment, they should never end up knowing more than you do about your environment. So that's the first thing. And I think as we saw the wave in ransomware attacks come, I still think that people were not reviewing not only their current security environment, but also not reviewing it against the current threat. So the fact that people are still going, gee, I really haven't reviewed my backup strategy in the last 4 years because it's been good, but the threat landscape has changed. Ransomware has become more and more of a threat. The threat actors have become more active. So you need to look at the current set of threats against the controls you already have and against the type of operation you may be running. Maybe ransomware isn't really a big threat for you. I can't think of, something, but maybe something else, maybe in that category. So don't just say, gee, my protections, and this may be going back to Marco's talk earlier. We shouldn't just keep, looking at something that hasn't happened and assume that it's not going to happen next. Right? So, make sure that you review the threat environment, that you look at what has been happening in industries like yours and companies like yours, and then set your expectations for security appropriately, and then review your controls and make sure that they are adequate.
Yeah, and I'll close with one particular thought in it, and I can't remember who said it in the first day, but ultimately the job we have is not security. For every one of our companies that we're working for, it's to make product. So that unfortunately security will lose every time if you have a battle between production and security. So one of the goals as I look for when I'm doing reviews, when I'm doing designs, is the security solution I've got here efficient? Is it going to slow production down? Is it going to slow the way people work? And I really want security I want security designs to encourage people to do the right thing, that the right thing is the secure thing and the easy thing is the secure thing. And go back to passwords. Passwords are just absolutely the worst thing that were ever invented because they slow people down. People write them down. They tell them to their partners. They use the same one over and over. You know the deal. There's a really good example of how we've let security get in the way of ease of use. And I really believe that the way we're going to have effective security is when it's easy, when it's the absolute easiest thing for somebody to do the secure thing. As long as we make the secure thing hard to do, we're fighting human nature.
Yeah, and we are a startup, and we do OT security, and this is a very different experience comparing to my IT security time. At that time, I only had to focus on the CISO, per se. And this time now, after CISO being convinced that you guys are concentrated, you guys have strategy, provide right product, and I want to use your solution. But when they say we want to use your solution, he's not the guy to make the decision that the product can be deployed.
Yeah.
We need to go to the plant manager again to convince the plant manager. But this time, the conversation is not about security.
Yeah.
It's about whether or not your solution will interrupt their operation. Yeah. And so, yeah, no matter brown or green, we need the product to be ready, have the environment fit, the operation fit, without interrupting. But unfortunately, there are not too many companies focusing on this. I think, sorry about that, but I think the macroeconomic and the pandemic really block a lot of startups in OT security. So not too many new companies are joining us.
So I think that was one of the key questions that has been rising up the chart, right? As in, who should be accountable if there is a malfunction in terms of security appliances, right? That could be sending wrong signals, wrong diagnosis that cause disruptions. Do you see that happening? As in, technology causing more disruptions than enhancing?
Yeah, I mean, we've been, as OT security solutions, actually, we have very, very high stickiness because it's hard to remove, right? You need to shut down the operation and remove the application, reboot and reinstall. And that's hard. People are reluctant to do that. But from time to time, we had the chance to replace some other IT security solutions that have been designed for IT with ample resources doing the investigation. But when they happen to OT, that causes a lot of trouble because they don't have enough people to look into the event, and eventually they have to replace those kind of solutions. So that do happen.
This is actually one of the areas. I think OT security has got way ahead of IT security. IT security, false positives are a way of life. Noise is accepted. And it's one of the actually things that I think we've really done well in OT security for the last 2 decades is actually probably because of the engineering rigor, because of the need to have really robust, reliable solutions. When I see a lot of the OT security solutions, they really are not noisy. They don't tend to fail that often. They have really exceptional lifetime, what do you call it? Uptime, exceptional uptime. So actually, I think it's one of the areas we've really won. And it's one of the areas that I worry when you take a pure IT security appliance and drop it into a control system. I do worry that you may be buying more problems than you think.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think to the question, when you see security appliances that may be disrupting, I think it's more to misconfiguration than the appliances themselves. And so once again, a review of the installation and how it's configured for the environment could then quiet a lot of those things down. So many times the interfaces or the integration of new tools is a great place to find a way into a system.
Yes.
Thank you so much for all the sharing. I think our time is up, and thank you so much for your questions as well. Let's give the panel speakers a round of applause. Thank you.